This is a second English language A-level video, which is about language, occupation and power. And this one is looking at one particular discourse and kind of deconstruct some of the language use in this area. It's about teaching. Okay, so first of all, what we're going to do is listen to a primary school teacher who's teaching a class of drama students. I think they're about 6 or 7 years old, and have a listen to the distinctive occupational language features that you are hearing.
The setting that they're describing.
Here we go.
Okay, so our walk today is describing a setting, and the setting we're looking at is our haunted house. Have a look at it. I'm going to give you just a minute, just to have a talk with your talk partner. What can you actually see in that picture of the haunted house? Think about everything you can see. Off you go. Do you remember in year 1 you did Mary Poppins? Do you remember Mary Poppins has a big chalk picture, doesn't she, that's been drawn for her on the floor? And when she steps into it, she ends up on a merry-go-round, doesn't she? She ends up entering a horse race. We're going to pretend to step into this picture, just like Mary Poppins does. Okay? So, I want you to think about, if you were to step into this picture, and you ended up standing on the steps in front of the haunted house, how would you be feeling? How would you act if you were on those steps? 10 seconds with your partner, how would you act? Not just scared, what does that look like? What does scared look like? What would you do, Daisy? You'd tiptoe, excellent idea. What would you do, Theo? You'd knock. What if it creaked open though?
Okay, stop it there. And I've done a transcript of that. So have a look at it there on that particular slide. What are you noticing there in her language, which is distinctive for this particular occupational group? Here are some of the things that I was noticing. This is by no means an exclusive list. Have you noticed the amount of praise that's going on here? So we've got lots and lots of positive face, where we've got explicit praise and politeness strategies. And what they do is they reward children's contributions and behaviour. That's unusual. You know, it would be unusual to have that level of praise if adults were talking with each other. In terms of the Lexist, obviously you've got quite simplified Lexis because this is enabling students to understand this new knowledge area. You've also got a level of familiarity there in the instructions. She's clearly drawing upon established routines. At one point she counts down to get them to be quiet. 3, 2, 1, and they're all quiet. So there are established routines there in terms of instructions. There's a fair degree of repetition. We've got repetition of key target words like here the noun phrase, haunted house. And you've also got quite a lot of discourse markers. Discourse markers are those little words like okay, for example, that signal that you're wanting attention or that you're starting a new topic. In terms of grammar, did you notice on the sentence functions that we have such a high proportion of interrogatives? Okay, so we've got different sorts of questions that we've got here. Some of them are genuine questions. Others of them are instructions dressed up as questions. Sometimes they're rhetorical questions. Sometimes they're things like tag questions. So it's quite interesting when you're looking at any kind of classroom discourse to see who is asking the questions and what sorts of interrogatives are actually being formulated. We have a big verbal imbalance. So that means the teacher is dominating the conversation. Her MLU, i.e. her mean length utterance, is by far higher than any of the students. So she's dominating the turn taking and the length of speech. Okay, and that's totally appropriate, isn't it, in the situation? It's not one of these situations where you'd be applying Grice's conversational maxims and saying, oh, well, she's clearly flouting Grice's maxims because she's speaking too much. No, this is expected, it's routine in this kind of discourse. And the teacher here is able to decide how she's going to address the students. So at times she's addressing the whole class. At other times, she's talking individually to individual students. Sometimes she's talking to groups, and she's varying her speech depending on the context, particularly things like her prosodic features and also her paralinguistic features as well. Another interesting grammatical feature to look at is the use of pronouns. And quite often she's using first person plural pronouns. So this is we, us, and our, which gives a sense of collective endeavour, that she's including the children in their journey forward. And this personalises the message. And I said before about instructions, quite often these instructions are phrased as kind of requests and suggestions rather than just direct instructions. Those are some of the teaching features that we see in primary schools. Now, obviously, there's been lots of research done into this area. Sinclair and Coulthard had a look at the exchanges that were going on in classrooms, and they called certain patterns of exchanges IRF. Now, this is not the IRA, this is IRF, which stands for Initiation, Response, Feedback. So these are adjacency exchanges that you're expecting to see in the classroom. And in this case, it's a three-part conversational exchange where the speaker starts a conversation, a second speaker responds, and then the first speaker provides some feedback to what the second speaker said. That's called IRF. Now, if you think about the talk that's going on in a classroom, it's not a free-for-all, is it? It does tend to be quite rigid. And obviously, certainly in successful classrooms, it tends to be teacher-led as well. Teachers tend to initiate the exchanges. They tend to do that through interrogatives, and then they offer evaluation of student responses. So they give this kind of valuable feedback, and they often reward. So this structure works because everybody in the room accepts the status and authority of the teacher. Where things go wrong, it's where that status and authority is being questioned. So there's also been some interesting research done on teacher feedback by O'Connor and Michael, where they looked at the tendency of teachers to revoice. So this is where teachers include the student's response in their subsequent discourse. So you get this a lot. This revoicing draws other students' attention to the comment, so it kind of rewards that student, but it shows its importance, and it also encourages others to contribute as well. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. So this is conventional IRF, initiation, response, feedback, and this idea of revoicing. Teacher says, what punctuation mark should we use here? Student says, a comma. Excellent. Well done. Sam says we need to include a comma here to separate this phrase from the rest of the sentence. So IRF, you've got the initiation there with the question, you've got the response, and then you've got the feedback to the evaluation of that comment. You've also got the revoicing as well, though, because after the student has said comma, then the teacher says, Sam says we need to include a comma here to separate this phrase from the rest of the sentence. So they're taking the utterance by the student, but they're also drawing upon it and giving more information about where this punctuation mark goes. So you're going to see this a lot in classroom exchanges, and there's been sort of really interesting research being done about waiting times and how long teachers wait after asking a question for an answer. So when teachers ask questions of students, says Mary Budd Rowe, they typically wait 1 second or less for the students to start a reply. And after the students stop speaking, they begin their reaction or proffer the next question in less than 1 second. This may be about teachers' anxieties to keep lessons going very briskly and not give opportunities for students to go off topic. But the disadvantage, of course, is that it doesn't build in thinking time for students, that teachers are expecting very quick, rapid kind of reactions to their questions, which doesn't necessarily encourage them to build upon very thoughtful answers. And the thing is, if teachers do wait longer, and we're talking about sort of 3 seconds or more, there are pronounced changes in student use of language as well as in student and teacher attitudes and expectations. There's better learning going on. So when wait time was used by teachers, they asked fewer but more complex questions. So using wait time, teachers became more adept at responding to students' contributions, and their expectations of students increased. And so what that results in is less passive learning and more active participants. We saw that a little bit in the clip there because the teacher was asking the students to talk in their partners before presumably they were going to be sharing their ideas whole class. So that's a kind of wait time. Okay, so drawing upon all this information that we've done so far and also the information in the previous video about things like, instrumental and influential power, what do you think about this question? Evaluate the idea that a person's occupational group completely dictates their language usage. Now there is a typical paper 2, section A, evaluative question. And in the exam, you'd have about 45 minutes to do an answer to that. Okay, so you're doing this evaluative thing. So that means that you're balancing up competing arguments. So it's an idea-driven thing. You're not going to have any data in front of you, so you're going to have to learn your research and perhaps learn examples of discourses as well. And you need to deconstruct at the beginning of the essay, do you completely agree, do you completely disagree, or do you only partially agree with this as a statement? And the wise thing to do is not to completely agree nor to disagree, but to be somewhere in the middle. Because we do have an issue here with this verb here, dictates. So it's not just saying that your job influences your language, it's saying your job completely dictates it, it determines it. So that's quite an extreme verb that's being used alongside the quite extreme adverbial of manner, completely. Okay, so you have to be prepared to put forward arguments, but also counter arguments as well, and come to some kind of balanced conclusion. If you were going to draw upon some data, you could draw upon your memories from this. So here is a Year 8 lesson. This is a history lesson that's going on. So to have a close read of how the teacher is using language in this situation and how they're shaping and manipulating the students' verbal responses. So read that carefully. I'd stop the video there. What are you noticing that's going on in the language? And perhaps how is it different or similar to what we've noticed in the primary school one? And these are the sorts of areas that I'd be drawing attention to were I writing an answer to this essay. So I'd want to be talking about instrumental and influential power, because in the classroom, a teacher has both. They have instrumental power to make you, the student, do certain things, but they've also got influential power to try and influence you to think and behave in certain ways. I'd want to be looking at the MLU, that means the mean length utterance, which is the average number of words spoken per term. And, you look to see to what extent is the teacher completely monopolising the discourse. Look at the pronouns that are being used. So do we have first person singular, plural, or second person pronouns? And if so, what uses are being made of them? Look also grammatically at the sentence functions as well. That's very important. Are they just declaratives that are being used by the teacher? Or have we got direct issues going on with interrogatives and imperatives and exclamatives? You could draw upon the research that I've just talked to you about, Synthard and Coulthard on the IRF, and O'Michael and Connor, O'Connor and Michael on revoicing. You could look at waiting time. Now, if you've got a transcript like the one I showed you on the previous slide, it's going to have brackets. So brackets means a pause. And if there is no number in that bracket, it means that the person has paused less than a second. So that gives you a clue as to how long the teacher is waiting. You could look at the semantic fields. You could look at the primary semantic fields of what's going on, but also the secondary semantic fields too. And you could look at the level of technical language, i.e. do we have jargon here? What expectations are being made about the student's schematic knowledge? And then finally, you might draw upon Howard Giles's notion of accommodation. So this is the idea that here we've got an adult teacher who's speaking with a bunch of 12-year-olds. So to what extent are they converging their language, downwardly converging their language, so it's closer to their text receiver? Or maybe they're doing at other times the opposite. Maybe they're diverging their language, maybe in an attempt to show instrumental power. Okay, so hopefully that's given you some ideas on how you might put together an answer about an occupational group with particular reference to teaching. Thanks very much.